was the hardest rule to follow in your house? My grandma banned all modern medicine from her house. I was 15 when we moved in with grandma after mom's car accident. Dad had left years ago, so it was just me, my 12-year-old sister Lucy, and grandma in her creaky house. The medicine ban started immediately. She threw out Lucy's inhaler and even the fluoride toothpaste. She said mom's death was God's punishment for trusting doctors instead of faith. Prayer and herbs would cure everything. When Lucy wheezed at night, grandma would rub eucalyptus oil on her chest and tell her to pray harder. Lucy was prone to severe asthma attacks that could land her in the ER, but grandma insisted her mysterious teas would fix everything. She'd stand over us while we drank her healing teas to make sure we swallowed every drop, never telling us what was in them. Sometimes Lucy's breathing got worse after drinking them, wheezing harder than before, but grandma said that meant they were working. I'd hidden one of Lucy's emergency inhalers in a hole I cut in my mattress. Some nights when Lucy couldn't breathe, especially after drinking whatever herbs grandma had boiled, I'd sneak into her room and give her a couple of puffs, just enough to stop the wheezing without grandma noticing she was better. Lucy thought it was the eucalyptus finally working. I let her believe that because if she knew about the inhaler, she might accidentally tell grandma. The guilt of lying to Lucy ate at me, but not as much as the fear of watching her suffocate in her sleep. The real problem started when Lucy got strep throat. Her fever hit 103, and she had white patches all over her throat. I knew it was strep because half her class had it. Grandma made her gargle with salt water and put onions in her socks. For 3 days, Lucy got worse. She stopped eating because swallowing hurt too much. She was so dehydrated, her lips cracked and bled. She couldn't even cry anymore because she didn't have enough fluid in her body to make tears. Grandma said it was the toxins leaving her body. I stayed up all night Googling death from untreated strep throat on my phone, under my blanket, reading about rheumatic fever and kidney failure. I couldn't watch my sister dying of something that 10 days of antibiotics would cure. I took $20 from grandma's purse while she was at church and walked 4 miles to the urgent care clinic. I told them I had strep symptoms and paid the clinic fee with grandma's money. The doctor barely looked at my throat before prescribing amoxicillin. I filled it at the pharmacy, my heart pounding the whole time because I knew this would end everything if grandma found out. The pharmacist asked if I had any questions about the medication, and I almost laughed because I'd researched dosages and side effects for hours. I crushed the pills and mixed them into Lucy's soup, telling her it was a new herb grandma wanted her to try. After 2 days, her fever broke. After 4, she could swallow again. After a week, she was completely better, asking for seconds at dinner and singing in the shower again. Grandma praised God for the miracle and said it proved doctors were unnecessary. I thought I'd gotten away with it until grandma found the pill bottle in my backpack when she was looking for her missing $20. Grandma stood in my doorway holding the antibiotics like they were a bag of poison. Her face was purple with rage, and her hands shook as she read the label over and over. Lucy was behind her in the hallway, finally healthy, finally able to breathe and swallow and laugh again. "You poisoned your sister with this filth," grandma said, her voice deadly quiet. "You brought Satan's chemicals into my home. You stole from me to buy it." I wanted to scream that I'd saved Lucy's life, that she would have died from strep throat in the 21st century because of grandma's insane beliefs. But I just sat there on my bed, knowing what was coming. We had nowhere else to go. No other family, no money. This house was all we had. "I'm calling social services," grandma said, pulling out her phone. "I'll tell them you're giving your sister dangerous substances without consent, stealing money, endangering a child." She started dialing. "They'll put you in juvenile detention and Lucy in foster care. At least then she'll be safe from you." Lucy started crying, begging grandma not to call, saying she felt better, that I'd helped her. But grandma wasn't listening. She was already talking to someone on the phone, using words like dangerous and unauthorized medication and immediate removal. I looked at Lucy and mouthed, "Pack your stuff," because I knew we had about 10 minutes before our lives exploded. Either we were going into the system separately, or we were running away together with nothing but whatever we could fit in our backpacks. Either way, we'd just become homeless because I couldn't let my sister die of strep throat in a house where antibiotics were considered evil. Grandma was giving our address to whoever was on the phone, and Lucy was frozen in the hallway, and I realized I had to choose right now whether to run or let them take us. Outside, I could already hear sirens. I jumped off my bed and grabbed Lucy's hand, pulling her into our room while grandma's voice got louder on the phone. She was saying something about theft and how I was giving Lucy dangerous drugs without permission. My hands shook as I yanked open Lucy's dresser and started shoving clothes into her backpack. Lucy stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes wide and confused. I told her we needed to pack right now because things were about to get really bad. The sirens got louder and louder until they suddenly stopped right in front of our house. I ran to the window and my stomach felt like it dropped through the floor. 2 police cars and an ambulance were parked on our street with their lights still flashing. Lucy came up behind me and started crying, asking if we were going to jail for the medicine. I turned around and grabbed her shoulders, telling her to stay calm and that we'd just tell them the truth. The police knocked hard on the front door, and I heard grandma's footsteps rushing to answer it. Her voice carried through the whole house as she immediately started telling them I'd been drugging my sister. 2 officers came into the house and one of them asked grandma where we were. She pointed down the hallway and they walked toward us while the EMS team followed behind them. The first officer was tall with gray hair and he told us they needed to talk to us separately. He asked me to come with him to the living room while his partner took Lucy to the kitchen. The EMS team went with Lucy and I could hear them asking her if she felt okay. The officer with me sat down on grandma's couch and pulled out a small notebook. He asked me about the medication grandma had mentioned on the phone call. I explained about Lucy getting strep throat and how her fever hit 103 degrees. I told him about the white patches on her throat and how she couldn't swallow or even cry. He wrote everything down and asked me where I got the antibiotics. I admitted I took $20 from grandma's purse and went to urgent care. Grandma walked over and shoved the prescription bottle at him like it was evidence of a crime. From the kitchen, I suddenly heard Lucy wheezing really badly, that scary sound that meant she couldn't get enough air. The stress of everything happening was triggering her asthma and making it hard for her to breathe. I heard the EMS team asking grandma for Lucy's rescue inhaler, and she told them she didn't believe in those things. I yelled out that there was one hidden in the hole I'd cut in my mattress. The officer looked at me surprised, but one of the paramedics ran to my room to get it. I heard him come back and give Lucy the inhaler, telling her to take slow, deep breaths. Grandma started yelling about how they were poisoning Lucy with chemicals, and that prayer would work better. After a few minutes, I could hear Lucy breathing normally again instead of that awful wheezing. The paramedic asked Lucy if she'd been having trouble breathing for a while, and I heard her say yes. He sounded worried as he wrote stuff down on his clipboard. About an hour later, a woman showed up carrying a briefcase and wearing a gray suit. She introduced herself as Marina Hurst from Social Services and said she needed to talk to all of us. She started with Lucy, taking her into the dining room while I had to wait in the kitchen with the officer. Grandma paced back and forth in the living room, muttering prayers and saying we'd betrayed her. I could hear Marina's calm voice asking Lucy questions, but couldn't make out what they were saying. After about 30 minutes, Marina came to get me, and we sat at the dining room table. She asked me to tell her about our living situation since Mom died in the car accident. I told her everything about Grandma throwing away Lucy's inhaler the day we moved in. I explained about the mysterious teas that Grandma made us drink and how they made Lucy wheeze worse. I told her about the nights I snuck into Lucy's room with a hidden inhaler. Marina wrote everything down in her notebook without looking upset or surprised at what I was saying. She asked me for more details about specific times Lucy had gotten sick. I told her about other kids at the school having strep and how I knew Lucy had it too. Marina asked to see the house, and Grandma had to let her, even though she didn't want to. We walked through each room and Marina took pictures with her phone of everything. She photographed the religious pamphlets about faith healing that were stacked on every table. She took pictures of Grandma's cabinet full of herbs and oils and mysterious dried plants. I showed her the trash can where Grandma had thrown Lucy's preventive asthma medications when we first moved in. Marina found more pamphlets about how modern medicine was evil and took pictures of those too. Why did Grandma call the authorities on herself when she's the one refusing medical care for a sick child? She's basically telling them, come look at how I won't let this kid have medicine, which seems like a really strange move when you think about it. Grandma followed us around, insisting she was protecting us from pharmaceutical demons that wanted to poison our bodies. After Marina had seen everything and talked to everyone for about 2 hours, she made a phone call. She came back and told us that she was calling for emergency removal from the home. She explained that denying necessary medical care to a child constitutes neglect under state law. She said with Lucy's documented asthma and the recent strep infection, we couldn't safely stay here anymore. Grandma started screaming about religious persecution and how the government was attacking her faith. Marina stayed calm while Grandma kept yelling and pulled out her phone to make some calls about finding us a place to stay for the night. She told us to go pack some clothes and essentials for a few days while she worked things out with her supervisor. Lucy grabbed my arm so tight her nails dug into my skin as we walked to our room, and I kept whispering that we'd stay together no matter what happened. We threw clothes into our backpacks while Grandma sat in her chair in the living room, switching between crying and shouting Bible verses at Marina. I grabbed Lucy's toothbrush and the book she was reading and stuffed them in her bag along with her favorite stuffed bear that she still slept with, even though she was 12. Marina came to check on us after about 20 minutes and helped Lucy zip up her overstuffed backpack, then led us out to her car while one of the officers stayed with Grandma. The moment Marina started driving, Lucy completely fell apart, sobbing and asking if it was her fault for getting sick, if she'd ruined everything by having asthma. I pulled her against me in the back seat and told her that keeping her healthy wasn't wrong, that medicine wasn't evil, that she deserved to breathe and live without pain. Marina glanced back in the rearview mirror and said Lucy deserved proper medical care, that no child should suffer when treatment exists. We drove for about 15 minutes before pulling up to a big house that looked like someone's home from the outside, but Marina explained it was an emergency shelter for kids. The intake worker who met us at the door looked tired but smiled kindly as she handed us forms to fill out and explained all the rules about curfew at 9 p.m., no leaving without permission, and mandatory check-ins every 4 hours. It felt weird signing forms about where we could and couldn't go, like we were checking into some kind of minimum security prison, but at least Lucy's asthma medications were right there on their approved medication list. They gave us a room with 2 beds and a small dresser, and that first night Lucy pulled out her inhaler and used it without looking over her shoulder or trying to muffle the sound. She took deep, full breaths, and for the first time in months she wasn't wheezing when she laid down to sleep. I stayed awake listening to her breathe normally, realizing this was what regular medical care looked like, what kids were supposed to have. The next morning, a nurse came to do full medical evaluations on both of us, checking our height and weight and asking about our medical history. Lucy got a brand new inhaler with a spacer attachment that helped her use it properly, plus an asthma action plan that explained exactly what to do if she had an attack. The nurse looked shocked when Lucy admitted she hadn't seen a real doctor since Mom died over a year ago, and she made notes about scheduling follow-up appointments with specialists. Marina visited that afternoon to explain what would happen next, telling us there would be a court hearing in a few weeks to figure out where we'd live permanently. She'd already started trying to find Dad, but his last phone number was disconnected, and his last known address was outdated. We didn't have any other relatives nearby, which meant we'd probably stay in foster care at least until the court decided what was best. She had me sign papers acknowledging that I'd stolen $20 from Grandma and given Lucy prescription medication without guardian consent, explaining that these facts would definitely come up in court. She said she'd argue that I was protecting Lucy from medical neglect, but the theft charge still made me look bad to the judge. 2 days later, they arranged a supervised phone call with Grandma, who immediately started crying and quoting Bible verses about honoring your elders and how foster care would corrupt our souls. She said we'd betrayed her and Mom's memory by choosing chemicals over faith, and Lucy surprised me by hanging up first without saying goodbye. 3 days after that, a counselor named Isabel Lopez helped us enroll in the local public school, setting up meetings with teachers and making sure they knew about our situation. She arranged for the school nurse to keep Lucy's rescue inhaler in her office and taught Lucy how to recognize her asthma triggers during school hours. It felt strange watching Lucy get excited about having her inhaler available at the school, like she'd forgotten what it was like to have access to medicine when she needed it. Back at the shelter, I kept thinking about just grabbing Lucy and running away together, finding somewhere we could disappear and start over. But there were cameras in every hallway and strict sign-out procedures, and Marina had warned me that if we ran, they'd definitely separate us when we got caught. So we followed every rule and went to every appointment and waited for our court date. While Lucy learned what it felt like to breathe freely, and I learned what it felt like to not spend every night terrified, my sister would suffocate in her sleep. Marina showed up at the shelter shelter 3 days later with a thick folder and a tired look on her face. She pulled me aside while Lucy was in art therapy and spread out papers on the cracked plastic table in the meeting room. She'd been trying to track down Dad for days, calling old numbers and checking addresses from court records. Turns out he was living in Colorado with a new wife and 2 kids under 5. The child support office had his file marked as uncollectible since he hadn't paid anything in 3 years and kept changing jobs to avoid wage garnishment. Marina tapped the papers and said this actually helped our case because it proved Grandma was our only family option when Mom died. She'd already filed the paperwork showing Dad wasn't a placement option and wouldn't even return calls about us. 2 weeks passed before Lucy had her first real test at the school. They were running laps in PE when she started wheezing bad, her face going red as she pushed herself to keep up with the other kids. The teacher noticed right away and walked her to the nurse's office where they gave her the rescue inhaler we'd registered. Lucy came home that afternoon bouncing with excitement, telling me how the nurse let her sit for 10 minutes until her breathing was normal again and then sent her back to class like nothing happened. She kept saying she couldn't believe how fast the medicine worked compared to Grandma's herbs that never helped at all. The state assigned me a therapist who worked with kids in the system, and our first session was in a small office that smelled like old coffee and printer ink. I sat on the worn couch, picking at a loose thread, while she asked about everything that happened with Grandma. When she asked what scared me most about the whole situation, I admitted it wasn't getting in trouble for the stolen money or the antibiotics, but the idea of being separated from Lucy. She nodded and helped me write out a statement for court that focused on Lucy's medical needs and how I was just trying to keep her alive. Marina called the next week with news about a potential placement. A woman named Opal Swanson had space for both of us and had fostered siblings before, so she knew how important it was to keep us together. We met her briefly at the social services office, and she looked tired but smiled when Lucy showed her a drawing she'd made in art therapy. Opal asked about Lucy's asthma right away and said she'd already raised 2 kids with asthma, so she knew all about nebulizers and peak flow meters and action plans. When Marina asked if she had any concerns about taking us, Opal just shrugged and said keeping kids healthy and safe was the whole point. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, and a week before, Marina brought us a letter from Grandma. Her handwriting was shaky as she wrote that she'd agree to let us use modern medicine if we came home, that she'd been praying, and maybe God worked through doctors sometimes too. Marina explained it wasn't that simple though, because the court would need Grandma to complete parenting classes and therapy and prove she could follow medical advice consistently. When Marina called Grandma to explain the requirements, we could hear her yelling through the phone that she wasn't going to let the government tell her how to raise children. Marina hung up and made notes in our file that Grandma was refusing all remediation services. That night at the shelter, Lucy sat on my bed and asked me straight out why I never told her about the inhaler hidden in my mattress. Her voice was quiet, but I could tell she was hurt that I'd kept secrets from her all those months. I explained that I was scared she might accidentally mention it to Grandma during one of their prayer sessions or when Grandma was rubbing oils on her chest. Lucy hugged me and said she understood why I did it, but her eyes were wet and I knew she felt betrayed that I didn't trust her enough to tell her the truth. The night before court, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept going over what Marina had coached me to say, how I needed to stick to facts about Lucy's medical conditions and not get emotional about Grandma's beliefs. I practiced in the bathroom mirror, explaining how Lucy's fever hit 103 with strep, how she couldn't swallow or cry, how her asthma was so bad she wheezed every single night. Something doesn't quite add up about Grandma's sudden change of heart in that letter. She's willing to compromise on medicine now that she's lost control. The timing of her offer to allow modern medicine feels more like a desperate move to get them back than a real shift in her beliefs. Marina said the judge had seen hundreds of medical neglect cases and would understand, but my hands still shook when I thought about testifying against Grandma. The courthouse was smaller than I expected, just a regular building downtown with metal detectors and tired-looking security guards. We sat on hard wooden benches outside the courtroom while Marina reviewed our case with the state's attorney. When they finally called us in, the judge was already reading through a stack of medical records and the reports from the EMTs who'd treated Lucy that first night. Grandma sat at a table with her lawyer, wearing her best church dress and clutching her Bible. The judge listened to Grandma's lawyer argue about religious freedom for maybe 5 minutes before cutting him off, saying religious beliefs don't override a child's right to necessary medical care. When they called me to testify, my legs felt like jelly walking to the witness stand. The judge asked me about the hidden inhaler and the antibiotics, and my voice cracked as I explained how I had to sneak Lucy medicine in the middle of the night just so she could breathe. He asked why I didn't report the situation earlier, and I told him we had nowhere else to go, that Grandma was all we had after Mom died. He nodded like this wasn't the first time he'd heard that excuse. They called Lucy next, and watching my 12-year-old sister climb into that witness chair made my chest hurt. She whispered her answers about not being able to breathe at night and how the herb teas made her wheeze worse instead of better. When the prosecutor asked if she wanted to go back to Grandma's house, Lucy looked right at Grandma and said, not if it meant not having her inhaler. Grandma started sobbing loudly, and her lawyer asked for a recess, but the judge said we needed to finish Lucy's testimony first. Lucy answered a few more questions about the herbs and teas, her voice getting stronger when she talked about how much better she felt after the medicine I gave her. The prosecutor thanked her, and she climbed down from the witness stand, coming straight to sit next to me and grabbing my hand tight. The judge shuffled through more papers while Grandma's lawyer tried to argue about how loving and caring she was, but the judge kept shaking his head. After what felt like forever, he finally looked up and said he was ready to make his ruling. He said medical neglect was clear, and that we couldn't return to Grandma's care right now. He ordered us to stay in foster placement with a woman named Opal, who Marina had found, someone who'd already passed all the background checks and home study stuff. Grandma could have supervised visits if she completed a medical education course and went to family therapy, but she had to prove she understood why medicine was necessary. Before the judge even finished talking, Grandma stood up and walked out of the courtroom, slamming the door so hard the bailiff jumped. Marina drove us straight to Opal's house that same afternoon, and I kept looking back at Lucy in the back seat to make sure she was okay. Opal met us at the door, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who smiled and didn't try to hug us or anything weird. She showed us to our room, and I couldn't believe it had 2 actual beds, not just a bed bed and a couch like at the shelter. There was a desk by the window and a closet with hangers already in it. Plus, she pointed to the bathroom cabinet where she kept regular stuff like Tylenol and Band-Aids and said we never had to ask permission to use them if we were hurt or sick. Lucy immediately took her inhaler out of her pocket and put it on the nightstand between our beds, right out in the open where anyone could see it. The first few days were weird because we kept waiting for rules about prayer time or special teas, but Opal just asked if we wanted pizza or pasta for dinner. About a week later, Marina called to say Grandma had signed up for her required classes and we'd have our first supervised visit soon. The visit was at some community center, and when we walked in, Grandma was already there with a plastic bag. She pulled out a bottle of holy water and started trying to bless Lucy's inhaler, saying she was combining faith with medicine now. Lucy pulled her inhaler away, but Grandma grabbed it back and started pouring oils on it, saying it would help the medicine work better. The supervisor, some guy with a clipboard, had to step in and tell Grandma she couldn't put substances on medical equipment. Grandma argued that olive oil was natural and godly, but he took the inhaler and went to wash it off while Lucy started wheezing from the stress. After that disaster, we didn't see Grandma for a while and just settled into normal life at Opal's house. She helped us figure out routines like homework right after school, then chores, then free time before bed. She took Lucy to see a special lung doctor who did all these breathing tests and changed her medicines around. The doctor gave her a different inhaler for daily use and kept the old one just for emergencies, plus some pills she had to take at night. For the first time since moving in with Grandma, Lucy went a whole week without wheezing even once, not even when she ran up the stairs. At the school, Isabel would find me in the hallway every Monday to check how things were going. My grades started going up because I wasn't staying awake all night listening for Lucy's breathing or sneaking her medicine. Lucy joined the art club and made friends with kids who didn't know anything about Grandma or foster care or any of our mess. She'd come home talking about her friend Alice's birthday party, or how her art teacher said she had real talent. Marina visited one afternoon and told us Grandma had started the required parenting classes, but walked out of the first therapy session after 10 minutes. She had to complete both things to get unsupervised visits, which meant we wouldn't see her alone anytime soon. Part of me felt relieved, but another part felt sad because Grandma was choosing her beliefs over us again. 2 months after moving in with Opal, Lucy had her first bad asthma attack at the house. She'd been playing outside and came in gasping, her lips turning that scary blue color. Opal didn't panic at all, just got Lucy sitting up straight and gave her the rescue inhaler while calling the doctor's emergency line. She followed the action plan the doctor had written out, timing the inhaler puffs and checking Lucy's breathing. Within 20 minutes, Lucy was breathing normal again, and Opal made us all hot chocolate like it was no big deal. She didn't make Lucy feel bad about having an attack or say she should have been more careful. A few weeks later, Marina called to say Grandma had finally completed enough requirements for another supervised visit. We met at a park this time, and Grandma looked older somehow, like she'd shrunk a little bit. She asked about school and didn't mention God or prayer or herbs once. Lucy showed her an art project she'd made, a painted wooden box, and Grandma actually smiled and said it was pretty. She didn't try to bless it or pour oil on it or anything. The therapist Marina found for me was this younger guy who didn't make me lie on a couch or anything like they do in movies. We just sat in regular chairs and talked about stuff. And after a few sessions, I told him about the guilt I felt for lying to Lucy about the inhaler. He helped me understand that protecting Lucy didn't make me bad, even if I had to break rules and steal money to do it. We worked through the anger I had at Grandma for almost letting Lucy die, and at Dad for leaving us with no good options. Slowly, I started feeling less guilty about that $20 because it literally saved Lucy's life. Then one day, Marina showed up with papers saying Dad had finally responded to all the court stuff. He was officially giving up his parental rights, signing papers saying he didn't want custody of us. It hurt more than I expected, seeing it in legal writing that he didn't want us. Marina said this was actually good because it meant we couldn't get yanked away to live with him and his new family. Opal had already started filing paperwork to be our long-term foster placement, which meant we could stay with her until we turned 18 if everything worked out. 3 months later, Marina drove us to the Children's Hospital for Lucy's lung function tests, and I watched the technician hook her up to this machine with tubes while Lucy breathed into it following instructions on a computer screen. The results came back showing major improvement from her baseline tests they'd done when we first moved in with Opal, though the doctor pointed at some areas on the scan showing scarring from years of untreated asthma attacks. Lucy started crying when the doctor said she could live a totally normal life with her medications, and I had to look away because seeing her that happy made my chest hurt in a good way. The doctor printed out the results and gave Lucy a copy to keep, and she held onto those papers the whole ride home like they were made of gold. That weekend, a package arrived addressed to Lucy with no return address, but when she opened it, there was a birthday card from Grandma with a $20 bill folded inside. The note said she'd been praying for us every day and going to grief counseling twice a week to work through Mom's death properly this time. She didn't write anything about wanting us back or missing us or how we should come home, which made me feel weird because it was progress, but also like she was letting us go. Lucy taped the card to her bedroom wall next to her inhaler, and the $20 went into a piggy bank Opal had given her. A few weeks later at the school, Lucy's art teacher entered her painting of a girl breathing in clouds into the district contest, and when the principal announced over the intercom that Lucy won first place for her grade level, I was sitting in math class and had to put my head down on my desk because I was so proud. Grandma trying to pour holy water and oils on Lucy's inhaler during their supervised visit makes me wonder if she's really understanding what the judge told her about mixing faith with medical care, or just pretending to comply while still doing dangerous things. Isabel came to find me after class and took a picture of me and Lucy holding the painting for our case file, and Lucy explained to everyone who asked that she could paint steady lines now because she wasn't shaking from trying to breathe. The painting went up in the main hallway display case, and every time I walked past it, I remembered those nights when she couldn't even hold a pencil steady. Marina came for her monthly visit and sat us down at Opal's kitchen table with a bunch of paperwork about permanency planning, explaining that if reunification with Grandma wasn't going to happen, Opal had already said she'd be open to adoption. The word adoption made my head spin because it meant we'd have a real legal home forever, not just until we turned 18. And Lucy must have been listening from the hallway because she came in and asked Opal if we could call her Mom if that happened. Opal's eyes got watery, and she said, "Whenever you're ready," in this quiet voice, and Lucy hugged her so so hard, Opal almost fell off her chair. 6 months after they'd taken us from Grandma's house, we had a big family team meeting at the social services building with Marina, the judge's representative, our therapists, and Grandma joining by video call on Marina's laptop. Grandma looked different on the screen, healthier somehow with her hair done nice and wearing regular clothes instead of her usual prayer robes, and when she spoke, she said she understood her grief over Mom had made her do things that hurt us. She said she wanted what was best for us, even if that meant not living with her, and the therapist on her end nodded like this was a big breakthrough. The judge reviewed everything at the next court hearing, reading through Marina's reports and the medical records and Grandma's progress in therapy before extending our foster placement with Opal for another 6 months. Grandma got monthly supervised visits if she wanted them and could call us once a week on Sunday afternoons. Plus, she had to keep going to therapy and take a class about childhood asthma to understand Lucy's medical needs. Marina said it wasn't perfect, but it was movement in the right direction, and I noticed she didn't say anything about us going back to live with Grandma eventually. The next month, Lucy signed up for the school talent show and practiced singing this song from a movie every single day until Opal and I knew all the words by heart. On the night of the show, Lucy stood on that stage in front of hundreds of people and sang the whole song without getting winded once, hitting all the high notes that would have left her gasping before. Grandma came to the supervised visit the next day and told Lucy she was proud of her, and she didn't add anything about how Mom would have been proud too, or how God gave her that voice, which our therapist said showed Grandma was learning to separate her grief from our daily lives. I got a letter in the mail saying I'd been accepted to a summer program at the medical school for high school students interested in healthcare careers, and apparently my essay about saving Lucy from strep throat had made the selection committee pay attention. Opal spent hours on the phone figuring out transportation and schedules, treating it like I was her actual kid getting into something important, and she even bought me new notebooks and pens for the program. Marina called one afternoon to tell us Grandma had graduated from both her parenting class and the medical education course about asthma, and she wanted to show us her certificates at the next visit. When we met at the supervised visit location, Grandma pulled out this notebook full of notes she'd taken about asthma triggers and peak flow meters and controller versus rescue medications, and she knew the actual names of Lucy's medicines. Now, instead of calling them poison, she'd highlighted sections about how untreated asthma could cause permanent lung damage and had written, "I'm sorry," in the margin next to it. A whole year after that night with the sirens and the police and Grandma calling social services on us, we met her at a park for our first visit without a supervisor watching everything. She brought sandwiches she'd made and a blanket to sit on, and when Lucy pulled out her inhaler to take a puff before running to the playground, Grandma just nodded and said that was smart thinking to prevent an attack during exercise. We walked back to Opal's car, and Lucy ran ahead to buckle herself in, while Grandma squeezed my shoulder and got into her own car. That night at dinner, Opal pulled out a thick folder and spread papers across the kitchen table. She explained these were adoption forms and asked if we wanted to make this permanent. Lucy jumped up so fast her chair fell backward and she threw her arms around Opal's neck. I signed my name on every line Opal pointed to while my hand shook a little. Marina called the next morning to say Grandma had already told her she wouldn't fight the adoption. She understood now that being our grandmother didn't mean she had to be our guardian. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. 2 weeks later, Lucy got invited to her first sleepover at her friend Alice's house. Opal spent 20 minutes on the phone with Alice's mom explaining Lucy's asthma medications. She packed Lucy's inhaler in a special bag with written instructions about when to use it. Lucy came home the next afternoon bouncing around the living room and talking non-stop about movies and popcorn. She'd used her inhaler twice during the night and nobody made a big deal about it. 3 months passed with court dates and home visits and more paperwork than I knew existed. Grandma called one Sunday afternoon and asked if she could come to my graduation next year. She promised to follow every single one of Opal's rules about medical stuff. Lucy and I sat on the porch for an hour talking about whether we were ready for that. We decided she was still our grandmother, even if she couldn't raise us anymore. The adoption hearing happened on a Thursday morning in May at the courthouse downtown. The judge read through all the reports while we sat in uncomfortable wooden chairs. He asked Lucy and me if this was what we wanted, and we both said yes immediately. He signed the final paper and said we were officially Swansons now. Opal cried and hugged us both while Marina took pictures with her phone. That Saturday, we had a small party in Opal's backyard with a cake from the grocery store. Isabel came with balloons, and Marina brought her kids, who played with Lucy. Even our therapist stopped by to congratulate us and eat cake. A card arrived from Grandma with a photo album she'd been keeping in her closet. The album had pictures of Mom from when she was our age and younger. It was Grandma's way of saying she accepted how things turned out. Lucy started running with some girls from the school who were forming a track team. The coach said she needed a physical first, so Opal took her to the doctor. They did lung function tests and said Lucy could absolutely run track with her medications. At her first meet, I watched her run the 800-meter race without stopping once. She came in third place, but she was breathing normally at the finish line. Opal yelled louder than any other parent in the stands. Grandma started coming for Sunday dinner once a month after that. She brought apple pie from the bakery and told stories about Mom's childhood. She took her blood pressure pills right at the table without saying anything negative. We were completely different people than we'd been that day with the sirens. Lucy had friends calling the house every afternoon, and her grades went from C's to A's. She could sing in choir without getting winded and run a mile in PE class. She laughed at everything and painted her nails different colors every week. I got accepted to the state college with a partial scholarship for their nursing program. Opal said my room would always be mine even when I left for school. We'd survived by breaking Grandma's hardest rule about medicine, and everyone's lives got better. Lucy breathed easy and lived like any other 13-year-old kid should live. That $20 I stole to buy antibiotics had saved everything that mattered. Thanks for sticking around and wondering through all of this with me. I've really enjoyed sharing these moments together. I'll see you next time, and hey, subscribe for more content like this.